You want a timeless song, I wanna change the game.
Dua Lipa opened her 2020 album Future Nostalgia with a very ambitious goal, and she achieved it. Despite having some hit singles from her first album, Future Nostalgia basically single-handedly propelled Dua to global superstardom and established her in most people's eyes as a main pop girl, a category filled with the likes of Taylor Swift and Ariana Grande. Dua's meteoric rise is similar to the sudden, overwhelming popularity of singers like Billie, Eilish, and Olivia Rodrigo. But what they all have in common is that once they reach that level of success, people assume that it's permanent. And this led to major expectations for Dua's follow-up album Radical Optimism, which by all metrics has somewhat underperformed. Today, I want to talk about what went wrong for Radical Optimism and ask the question, is Dua Lipa in her flop era? And is she still a main pop girl? Firstly, I think it's important to make clear what Radical Optimism was supposed to be. Even on your first listen, the album's message is pretty clearly conveyed, and there is a coherent story and theme to the album. The album explores the various aspects of romantic love, from meeting someone you really like, worrying that you'll get hurt, obsessing about their past, breaking up and seeing your ex with someone new. And through all of these emotions and experiences, which are normally considered negative, Dua presents them in a radically optimistic way. In the song Maria, Dua discusses her boyfriend's ex after seeing the lasting impact she left on him, but is extremely positive and grateful to Maria, thanking her for shaping her boyfriend into the man he is today. And on Happy For You, Dua finds herself surprised at being happy for an ex, who is with someone new and realizes that she must have really loved him if she now truly wants the best for him. In terms of the radically optimistic theme, Dua presents it well, and that narrative links all of the songs together thematically, which is an improvement from Future Nostalgia and her self-titled first album, neither of which had anything linking the lyrical themes on the album together. The album's issues, though, really come with the sound. And this is probably the more important aspect of a Dua Lipa album since she has established herself as a hitmaker, and most people don't care about her lyrics that much. The expectations for the sound of this album were extremely high after Future Nostalgia. Not only was that album a massive commercial success, but it was extremely well reviewed by critics, ending up with an average score of 88 out of 100 on Metacritic, and being highly respected for its sonic concept, which is exactly what the title says, futuristic nostalgia. She blends nostalgic-sounding elements of disco and 1980s house with futuristic electronic dance pop. On both counts, Dua was exploring sounds everyone has heard before, but blending them together in a new and experimental way, which worked extremely well. Future Nostalgia was an album of sonically cohesive back-to-back hits, spawning several globally successful singles, and even non-singles which very easily could have been hits, like Hallucinate and Cool. The album's excellent cohesive sound led to widespread praise, not just of the album, but of Dua personally, with the NME going as far as to say that she's a contender for the greatest pop star of her generation, and The Guardian calling her a pop visionary. Since the rollout of Future Nostalgia, Dua continually promoted more and more songs as singles, and released several versions of the album, leading to an era that lasted years and became one of the most memorable pop album eras of the 21st century, alongside iconic albums like Teenage Dream, 1989, and Thank You Next. But despite singles in between, Dua waited 4 years to drop Future Nostalgia's successor, Radical Optimism. And the high bar she set for herself with her second album, and the long wait led to high hopes for Radical Optimism. People were radically optimistic. But I think it's fair to say this album was somewhat of a flop. The Radical Optimism era began in November with the release of the lead single Houdini. This is a dark, sexy, psychedelic track, produced by Kevin Parker of Tame Impala, who has previously produced on darker albums like Rihanna's Anti, The Weeknd's After Hours, and Travis Scott's Astroworld. The song was received well by critics, but performed somewhat poorly, reaching number 1 in several European countries, but peaking at number 11 in the US. I personally love this track and think it's probably the strongest song on the album. It's really dark and intense and feels well suited to clubs. But probably most importantly, it fits Dua. With Future Nostalgia, she carved out a distinct sound for herself in the retro-inspired upbeat bangers category, given that Future Nostalgia came out in 2020, while her peers were not creating traditional pop. with Taylor focusing on indie folk, Ariana focusing on R&B, and Beyoncé focusing on experimental Afrobeats-inspired pop. Houdini is on brand for Dua, so it seems like a safe bet for a single. But it also is a significant change from the disco vibe of her previous album. I think after Houdini's release is where things start to fall apart. Not only was it not marketed particularly well, leading to its underperformance, but she waited over 3 months to drop the second single, Training Season, and then a further 2 months after that for the third single, Illusion. I personally think all 3 of these were marketed badly. Many people weren't even aware that these songs were coming out, and they ended up peaking on the Billboard 200 at 11, 6, and 43 respectively. They also were criticized for sounding too similar to one another and to her previous hits. I personally don't understand this criticism for Houdini and Training Season. I think they're both distinct from one another and from her previous songs. Illusion, on the other hand, does have similarities to Dance the Night and Hallucinate, so I slightly understand the criticism there. But I don't think people are expecting revolutionary music when it comes to Dua. Just catchy songs will suffice. So why did they underperform? Firstly, they just didn't receive enough promotion. I personally know a lot of people who didn't know Dua was even putting out new music. In comparison to albums like Eternal Sunshine, Tortured Poets, and Cowboy Carter, Radical Optimism just hasn't been promoted a ton. She also left her former management team at Tap Music a couple of years ago and is now managed by her dad. It's not super clear why she left, especially considering they were the team who incredibly marketed Future Nostalgia and brought Dua to global success, but it was reported at the time that it was over a financial dispute, and Dua being unhappy about how large of a cut they were taking of her earnings. It's gonna take a bit longer to see whether this was a good move, but it did get the era off to a messy start. But the other reason why I think these pre-album singles were underperforming is how weird the rollout was. They were insanely spaced out by multiple months. Compare this to Future Nostalgia, where you had Don't Start Now, Future Nostalgia 6 weeks later, Physical a month later, and Break My Heart around 6 weeks after that, all before the album came out. The other issue with this rollout, and my biggest issue with the marketing generally, is that there seemed to be some sort of change of aesthetic. When Houdini dropped, the music video and artwork all seemed to be red-themed, edgy, and intense. Dua is sweating in the music video. Her tongue was featured prominently in the promo photos. There was a ton of darkness and strobe lights going on. Everything seemed geared at a much darker aesthetic than Future Nostalgia, which was disco-inspired and glittery and extremely colorful. Training Season seemed to have the same dark, intense aesthetic, with her performing the single dressed in leather and mesh. Something seemed to change right after that, and I don't know if something happened behind the scenes to cause a drastic shift. But suddenly, all of the marketing material was blue-themed, featuring Dua swimming, and it was generally much softer, brighter, and more summery. The Illusion music video seems to clarify what Dua was going for. She's wearing the same leathery dark outfits, but in a beachy location. And that exact blend is what we got on the album. There are lighthearted summery songs with plucky acoustic guitars on songs like French Exit and Maria, and darker intense psychedelic influences on songs like Houdini, Training Season, and Falling Forever. Unlike Future Nostalgia's blend of futurism and retro, the blend of genres on this album doesn't quite work, and it feels a little jumbled and confused, particularly because the songs themselves are not really a mixture of the two sounds. The tracklist just jumps back and forth from darker to lighter and lacks some cohesion. Houdini is one of the only tracks where you feel the imprint of Tame Impala, and that amazing psychedelic darkness feels abandoned as you progress through the album. I think this is a weaker album than Future Nostalgia, but it's not bad. All of the songs are enjoyable and pleasant. It just doesn't have the same standout tracks that her previous albums did. I've listened to it a few times and only really have intentions to revisit the singles, Falling Forever and Maria. There are songs like End of an Era that are quite predictable and repetitive. And then there are songs like Anything for You, which is interesting but extremely short and cuts off just as you're getting into it. I just don't think this blend particularly worked. Again, I'm unsure if this is just not an amazing execution of a concept, or if something happened behind the scenes. Dua released extended mixes of the singles which are much more psychedelic, leading me to wonder if her label Warner Records pushed her into going less psychedelic for radio purposes, since psychedelia isn't particularly trendy right now. Either way, the lasting impression this album gives is that it's on the verge of something really interesting, but doesn't quite deliver on it. Critics seem to agree with me on this, with the Evening Standard calling it a half-hearted experiment, and Paste saying it lacks depth and risk. Generally, the criticism from both music critics and the general public is that the album doesn't offer what its title promises: anything radical. And all of this led to Radical Optimism releasing on Spotify with 20.5 million streams in its first day, and around 60,000 US sales. Future Nostalgia, by comparison, debuted with 29.1 million streams and 66,000 sales. I started by saying that the astronomical success of Future Nostalgia led to Dua being considered a main pop girl. But based on her recent streaming figures, that title is called into question. By comparison, here are some of the recent debut Spotify streams by other so-called main pop girls, and here are some stats from less successful female artists. As you can see, it seems fairer to put Dua in the category of less famous female musicians. Is she still a main pop girl? I would say it's complicated. Someone like Katy Perry hasn't had a smash hit album in a while, but is still highly respected for her older work, and I think for now, Dua is comparable. She deserves to be highly respected for what she did with her second album, but she clearly is not at a level where anything she produces will be automatically successful. And there is a chance that that's not what she wants. Future Nostalgia was interesting because it was both commercially successful and critically acclaimed. But this is an anomaly, and normally artists have to choose whether they are going to prioritize artistry or popularity. Possibly Dua trying to do both here is what led to Radical Optimism seeming limited. If she wants to focus on artistry, then she can't have half-hearted attempts at a new genre like she shows on this album. But if she wants to focus on commercial success, then waiting 4 years to release an album, leading everyone to think she's spending so long because she's making an amazing piece of art just to release an album of catchy songs, probably isn't the best option. With Rihanna in retirement from music, there's a gap in the industry for a solid back-to-back hitmaker, and I think Dua could do that, particularly because she doesn't really have a dedicated fan base and seems better suited to focusing on hits. If she wants to, all she has to do is release an album every year, or at least every 2 years, with a few smash hits, and the rest can be filler album tracks. If she wants to make people wait, expectations are going to be high, and she can't expect a poorly executed concept to perform well. Dua has the capacity to be a main pop girl. I just think when it comes to the battle between hits and art, she might need to choose a lane. Let me know what you think, and please subscribe if you enjoy.